The bullet that grazed Helena's shoulder in the spring of 1878 wasn't the worst wound she'd ever received, but it was the one that finally drove her to leave Cheyenne, Wyoming territory, behind for good. She pressed a hand to the bandage beneath her worn cotton dress as the stagecoach rattled westward toward Montana territory, each jolt sending fresh pain through her arm. The other passengers kept their distance, sensing something broken in her that went deeper than physical injury. At 23 years old, Helena Ramsey had loved 3 men in her short life, and each one had left her with scars that never quite healed. The first was Thomas, the merchant's son who'd promised her everything when she was 18, then married the banker's daughter for her dowry. The second was Jack, the gambler who'd stolen her savings and disappeared into the night. The third was Daniel, the ranch foreman who'd seemed different, seemed kind, until his fists proved otherwise. That final beating had ended with her fighting back, a derringer in her trembling hands, and Daniel stumbling backward with a bullet wound that would heal long before her heart did. Now Helena was running again, heading to Granite, Montana territory, where her late mother's sister owned a boarding house and had promised her refuge. The landscape grew more rugged as they traveled north, the flat plains giving way to rolling hills and distant mountains. She watched it all through eyes that had learned not to hope for beauty, only survival. The stagecoach arrived in Granite on a Tuesday afternoon in late May, when the mountain air still carried winter's chill, despite the spring sunshine. The town sprawled along a creek, surrounded by pine-covered slopes where mining operations scarred the hillsides. It was rough and raw, populated mostly by miners, loggers, and the people who made their living off such men. Perfect for someone who wanted to disappear. Helena's aunt, Margaret, met her at the coach station, a stout woman in her 50s with kind eyes and work-worn hands. She took one look at Helena's pale face and shadowed eyes and asked no questions, just wrapped her in a fierce hug that made Helena's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Come on, girl," Margaret said, picking up Helena's single carpet bag. "Let's get you home and fed. You look like you haven't eaten properly in weeks." The boarding house stood on the edge of town, a 2-story wooden structure that had seen better days but remained sturdy. Margaret ran it alone since her husband had died in a mining accident 5 years prior. She housed mostly respectable working men, miners and craftsmen who paid their rent on time and caused no trouble. "I'll need your help with the cooking and cleaning," Margaret said as she showed Helena to a small room on the 2nd floor. "But you'll have your own space, and nobody will bother you here. I make sure of that." Helena nodded, grateful beyond words. She spent the first week in a haze, performing her duties mechanically while her shoulder healed and her mind stayed carefully blank. She avoided the boarders, slipping in and out of rooms like a ghost, speaking only when necessary. The men, sensing something fragile in her, kept their distance and their manners impeccable. It was on her 8th day in Granite that Nathan Cross first walked through the boarding house door. Helena was coming down the stairs with an armload of linens when she heard Margaret's voice in the entryway, warm and welcoming in a way that suggested genuine affection rather than mere business courtesy. She paused on the landing, curious despite herself. "Nathan, it's been months. I was starting to think you'd found somewhere else to stay when you're in town. You know there's nowhere else I'd rather be, Maggie." The voice was deep and easy, carrying a smile in it. "I've been up in the high country moving cattle, just got back yesterday." Helena descended the last few steps slowly, and that's when she saw him. He stood in the doorway backlit by afternoon sun, a tall figure in dusty trail clothes, hat in hand. As he turned toward the sound of her footsteps, she caught her first clear look at his face. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with sun-darkened skin and dark brown hair that needed cutting. His features were strong without being harsh, his jaw shadowed with several days' worth of beard. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, light hazel in his tanned face, direct and honest in their regard. He looked at her with simple interest, nothing predatory or calculating in his gaze. "Nathan, this is my niece Helena," Margaret said. "Helena, this is Nathan Cross. He works for the Carpenter Ranch east of town and stays here when he's between jobs or helping with cattle drives." "Madam." Nathan nodded respectfully, making no move to approach her or offer his hand. Something in her posture must have warned him off. "Pleasure to meet you." Helena managed a brief nod, clutching her linens like a shield, and hurried past toward the kitchen. Behind her, she heard Margaret picking up the conversation smoothly, covering her rudeness. Over the following days, Helena found herself acutely aware of Nathan's presence in the house. He was quiet for such a large man, moving with a care that suggested he was used to working around skittish animals. He kept his room tidy, was never late for meals, and treated Margaret with a courtesy that seemed genuine rather than calculated. He tried once or twice to speak with Helena beyond simple greetings. She rebuffed him with monosyllables and averted eyes, and he didn't push. She should have been relieved. Instead, she found herself annoyed by how easily he accepted her coldness, how little he seemed to care. She was scrubbing pots in the kitchen one evening, arms deep in sudsy water, when Margaret came to stand beside her. "Nathan's a good man," her aunt said without preamble. "One of the best I've known. Lost his parents young, raised by his grandfather on a small ranch in Colorado. Works harder than any 3 men, saves his money, doesn't drink or gamble or carouse. He's been staying here for near on 2 years whenever he's in town, and he's never been anything but respectful." "I didn't ask," Helena said, scrubbing harder. "No, but you've been watching him when you think nobody notices." Margaret's voice was gentle. "I'm not saying you should do anything about it. Lord knows you've got reasons to be wary. I just wanted you to know that not every man is like the ones who hurt you." Helena's hand stilled in the water. "It doesn't matter if he's different. I'm not interested in finding out." Margaret patted her shoulder and left without another word, but her message lingered in Helena's mind like an unwelcome seed taking root. The next Sunday, Margaret convinced Helena to attend church services. Helena agreed reluctantly, more because she felt indebted to her aunt than from any religious conviction. She'd lost her faith somewhere between Thomas's betrayal and Daniel's fists. The church was a simple wooden structure, packed with miners and their families, respectable townspeople, and a handful of ranchers from the surrounding area. Helena sat beside Margaret in the back, keeping her eyes down, trying to ignore the curious glances from neighbors wondering about the new face in town. She didn't see Nathan until the service ended and they filed out into the sunshine. He stood talking with an older couple near the church steps, and as Helena passed, she caught fragments of their conversation. "Those horses you broke for us are working out beautifully, Nathan," the woman was saying. "You have such a gentle way with them." "They just needed patience, Mrs. Carpenter," Nathan replied. "Most things do." Helena felt his eyes on her as she walked past, but he didn't call out or try to follow. She told herself she was glad. That week passed into the next, spring settling into early summer. The mountain snow melted, swelling the creeks and bringing wildflowers to the meadows. Helena fell into the rhythm of boarding house life, her shoulder healing, her hands remembering the patterns of domestic work. She began to sleep better, no longer jerking awake at every sound, no longer keeping Daniel's derringer under her pillow. She also began to notice things about Nathan Cross that annoyed her precisely, because they contradicted everything she'd learned to expect from men. He never left his room in disarray. He washed his own clothes rather than expecting Margaret to do it. When one of the other boarders, a young miner named Samuel, came home drunk and belligerent one night, Nathan quietly but firmly escorted him to his room and sat with him until he sobered up, preventing any disturbance to the household. The next morning, Samuel ate breakfast with a hangover and a sheepish apology, clearly having been lectured about respecting Margaret's house. Nathan was also unfailingly courteous to Helena, but in a way that expected nothing in return. He said good morning whether she responded or not. He thanked her for meals she helped prepare, his voice sincere. He held doors without making a show of it, offered to carry heavy things without implying she was weak, and most irritatingly of all, he seemed completely untroubled by her continued coldness. It was a Thursday morning in mid-June when everything shifted. Helena was in the vegetable garden behind the boarding house, kneeling in the dirt as she weeded the rows of young plants. She discovered that she liked this work, liked the smell of earth and growing things, liked the mindless repetition that let her thoughts drift. The morning was warm, promising a hot afternoon, and she'd rolled up her sleeves and removed her bonnet, letting the sun touch her face. She didn't hear Nathan approach until his shadow fell across the garden bed. "Morning," he said quietly, not wanting to startle her. Helena sat back on her heels, squinting up at him. He held 2 cups of coffee, steam rising in the morning air. He offered one to her. "Thought you might like some. Saw you come out here without any." She almost refused on principle, but the coffee smelled too good, and he'd already set the cup down on the garden fence before turning to leave, not waiting for thanks or conversation. Something in that gesture, the lack of expectation, made her speak. "Thank you." Nathan paused, glancing back. A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his serious features into something warm and open. "You're welcome." He started to walk away again, and Helena surprised herself by speaking once more. "The garden was your idea, wasn't it?" Margaret mentioned someone helped her plan it last year. "Guilty," Nathan admitted, turning back to face her. "I grew up working a ranch. Always figured a good vegetable garden was worth its weight in gold, especially somewhere this remote. Saves money and tastes better than anything from the general store. You laid it out well. Good spacing, sensible crop rotation." His eyebrows rose slightly. "You know about farming. My father had a small farm in Iowa before he died. I was 12 when we lost it." The words came out before she could stop them, memories she usually kept locked away. "My mother and I moved to Cheyenne after that. She did laundry, I helped when I was old enough. She died 3 years ago." "I'm sorry." Nathan's voice carried genuine sympathy. "Losing parents young is hard. My ma died bringing me into the world, my pa when I was 15. My grandfather raised me, but he's been gone 5 years now." They stood in silence for a moment, 2 people connected by loss and loneliness. Then Nathan tipped his hat. "I'll let you get back to your weeding. But if you want company sometime, I'm a pretty decent gardener. Could help with the heavier work." He left before Helena could decide whether to accept or refuse the offer, and she found herself staring after him, coffee cup warm between her hands, something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It felt uncomfortably like hope, and she immediately tried to smother it. But hope, once kindled, proved difficult to extinguish. Over the following week, Nathan made good on his implied offer. He appeared in the garden in the early mornings or cool evenings, never pushing conversation but making himself useful. He reinforced the fence where deer had damaged it, helped Helena transplant seedlings, showed her his method for dealing with the cutworms that threatened the young plants. They talked in fragments at first, careful exchanges about practical things. The weather, the best way to stake tomato plants, whether they should try growing melons this year. But gradually the conversations deepened, touched on other things. Nathan spoke about his work at the Carpenter Ranch, his plans to save enough money to buy his own place someday. A modest spread where he could raise horses, breed them properly, train them with the patience he believed they deserved. His voice came alive when he talked about horses, about understanding their nature rather than breaking their spirits. Helena found herself sharing more than she intended, though she still kept the worst of her past locked away. She talked about the books she'd loved as a girl, the education her mother had scrimped to give her before poverty made such luxuries impossible. She mentioned her skill with numbers, how she'd kept accounts for some of the Cheyenne merchants until Daniel had isolated her from that work. She didn't mention Daniel by name, didn't mention any of them, but Nathan seemed to sense the shadows in her past, the reasons for her wariness. He never asked, never pried. He just showed up, steady and reliable day after day. It was Margaret who finally forced the issue. "That man is courting you," she said one evening as they prepared supper together, kneading dough for biscuits. "You know that, don't you?" Helena's hands stilled. "He's just being helpful." "Helena." Margaret's voice was patient but firm. "I've seen a lot of men in my years running this boarding house. I know the difference between helpful and courting. Nathan Cross is courting you, slow and careful, like you're a wild thing he's trying not to spook. I don't want to be courted, don't you?" Her aunt turned to look at her directly. "Or are you just afraid to want it?" The question hit too close to the truth. Helena focused on her own dough, punching it down with more force than necessary. "It doesn't matter what I want. Every time I've trusted a man, every time I've let myself believe someone might be different, I've been wrong. I won't survive being wrong again." "You won't survive never trying again either," Margaret said gently. "That's just a different kind of death, slower but just as certain." That night, Helena lay awake in her small room, staring at the ceiling while moonlight filtered through the curtains. She thought about Thomas's empty promises, Jack's theft, Daniel's violence. She thought about the derringer she'd fired in self-defense, the blood on her hands, the terror of wondering if she'd killed him. But she also thought about Nathan's quiet presence in the garden, his patient hands tending plants, his slow smile when she said something that amused him. The way he'd sat with drunk Samuel, firm but kind, preventing trouble without humiliation. The respectful distance he maintained even as he made his interest unmistakably clear. She fell asleep with her thoughts in turmoil, no closer to knowing what she wanted or whether she could risk reaching for it. The decision was taken out of her hands 3 days later. Helena was returning from the general store, basket on her arm, when she encountered a group of miners outside the saloon. Most moved aside politely to let her pass, but one, clearly drunk despite the early hour, stepped into her path. "Well now, who's this pretty thing?" He leered at her, whiskey-sour breath making her stomach turn. "Ain't seen you before. You new in town, sweetheart?" Helena tried to step around him, heart pounding, memories of Daniel's drunken rages flashing through her mind. The miner grabbed her arm and panic seized her throat. "Let go of me." Her voice came out higher than she intended, thin with fear rather than firm with command. "Aw, don't be unfriendly. I just want to talk." His grip tightened, fingers digging into the same arm Daniel had bruised so often. Helena's free hand moved toward the pocket where she'd taken to carrying the derringer again. Before she could reach it, before she could decide whether to scream or fight, a familiar voice cut through the moment like a knife. "Let her go. Now." Nathan stood 3 feet away, and Helena had never seen his face like this. All the gentleness was gone, replaced by something hard and dangerous. His posture was relaxed, but she recognized the coiled readiness in it, the promise of violence if his command wasn't obeyed. The miner, too drunk to recognize the threat, laughed. "This your woman, Cowboy. She don't wear no ring. I'm not going to ask again." Nathan's voice dropped lower, quieter, which somehow made it more menacing. "Let her go." Something in his tone finally penetrated the miner's alcohol-fogged brain. He released Helena's arm and stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. All right. No harm meant. Can't blame a man for trying with a pretty girl." Nathan moved between them, blocking Helena from the miner's view. "Go inside and sleep it off. If I hear you've bothered her again, bothered any woman in this town, we'll have a different kind of conversation." The miner muttered something under his breath but stumbled back into the saloon. The small crowd that had gathered dispersed, the entertainment over. Nathan turned to Helena, the hardness leaving his face, replaced by concern. "Are you hurt? Did he hurt you?" Helena shook her head, though she was trembling. "No, I'm fine. I could have handled it myself." "I know you could have." His response surprised her. "Saw you reaching for whatever you've got in your pocket, but you shouldn't have to handle it yourself, not when there's someone around who can help." He didn't touch her, didn't try to take her arm or escort her like she was helpless. He just stood there, solid and steady, waiting for her to gather herself. "Walk with me," Helena found herself asking, surprising them both. They walked in silence to the edge of town, where a path led up into the pines. The afternoon was warm, the air sweet with the scent of sun-heated needles and wildflowers. Helena's trembling gradually subsided, replaced by a strange clarity. "This is when you tell me I need a man to protect me," she said finally, an edge of bitterness in her voice. "When you explain that I should be grateful you were there, that I owe you something." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful, careful. "Is that what someone told you before? Some man who used protection as a cage?" The accuracy of his guess made her throat tight. She didn't answer, but her silence was confirmation enough. "Helena." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "I stepped in because that miner was drunk and you were scared. I'd have done the same for any woman in that situation, for any person who needed help. You don't owe me anything for basic human decency." "Most men don't see it that way." "I'm not most men." He said it simply, as a statement of fact rather than a boast. "I know you don't believe that yet. I know you've got reasons not to believe it, but I'm hoping, given time, I can prove it to you." Helena stared at him. This man who'd been patient with her for weeks, who'd shown up day after day without demanding anything in return. Something cracked in the walls she'd built around her heart, not breaking them entirely but letting light through the fissures. "I've been hurt before," she said quietly. "More than once. By men who seemed kind at first, who made promises they never intended to keep. Men who used love as a weapon and trust as a trap. I know." Nathan's eyes were steady on hers, full of a compassion that made her want to weep. "I don't know the details, but I can see the scars. Not the physical ones, though I've noticed those too. The ones on the inside. The ones that make you flinch when someone moves too fast, that make you keep your back to walls and your hand near your pocket." She'd thought she'd hidden it better. The fact that he'd noticed, that he'd seen her fears and treachery her gently anyway, made something inside her shift. "Why?" the question burst out of her. "Why bother with someone so damaged? There are other women in this town, women without all this fear and suspicion. Women who could trust you without you having to prove yourself every day." Nathan smiled, sad and sweet. "Because you're worth the effort. Because I see who you are underneath all that armor you wear. You're strong and smart and kind, even when you're scared. You help your aunt without complaint. You're gentle with that garden. You have a sharp sense of humor that comes out when you forget to guard it. I see all of that, and I want to know you better. I want you to feel safe enough to let me close." Helena felt tears burning behind her eyes. "I don't know if I can. I don't know if I'm capable of trusting anyone again." "Then don't." His response surprised her. "Don't trust me, not yet. Just let me stay around. Let me keep showing up, keep proving through actions instead of words that I mean what I say. Trust isn't something you give all at once. It's something that builds over time, piece by piece. I'm willing to wait for those pieces, however long it takes." She looked at him standing there in the dappled sunlight, patient and honest, offering her something she'd thought she could never have again, the possibility of someone who might actually be different. "I said I'd been hurt too many times," she whispered. Nathan stepped closer, just one step, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his hazel eyes. When he spoke, his voice was low and fierce with conviction. "Then I'll spend forever proving I'm different." The words hung in the air between them, a promise and a challenge and a plea all at once. Helena felt something break loose inside her, some knot of fear and pain that had been cinched tight for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. "I'm afraid," she admitted, the confession torn from somewhere deep inside. "I'm so afraid of being hurt again, of being wrong again. I don't know if I can survive it." "You don't have to be unafraid," Nathan said gently. "You just have to be willing to try. And I promise you, Helena, I will do everything in my power to make sure you never regret giving me that chance." She studied his face, searching for signs of deception, for the cracks where false charm might show through. But there was nothing but sincerity in his expression, nothing but patience in his posture as he waited for her decision. "All right," she said finally, the word barely audible. "All right, I'll try." Nathan's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, brilliant and warm and full of hope. He didn't reach for her, didn't try to seal the moment with a touch she might not be ready for. He just stood there grinning like she'd given him the world. "Thank you," he said simply. "You won't regret this." They walked back to town together, maintaining a careful distance but sharing a new awareness, a fragile beginning that felt like standing on the edge of something vast and terrifying and wonderful. The next weeks unfolded slowly, each day adding another brick to the foundation Nathan was building. He continued his pattern of showing up, being present, proving through consistent action that his words weren't empty. He brought Helena books from his own small collection, volumes of poetry and adventure stories he'd collected over the years. They sat in the boarding house parlor on quiet evenings, reading by lamplight while Margaret knitted and smiled to herself. Nathan never sat too close, never tried to engineer moments of forced intimacy. He just shared something he loved and let her see another piece of who he was. He invited Helena to ride out to the Carpenter Ranch one Sunday, chaperoned by Margaret, who wanted to visit her friend Mrs. Carpenter anyway. Helena agreed, curious despite her nervousness, and found herself entranced by Nathan's work with horses. She watched him gentle a young mare, all patience and soft words, never forcing, never harsh. The horse responded to him with trust that seemed miraculous, and Helena saw in that relationship what Nathan was trying to build with her: connection through kindness rather than dominance. "She's beautiful," Helena said, watching the mare nose at Nathan's shoulder, looking for the apple pieces he always carried. "She is," Nathan agreed. "Smart, too. She'll make someone a fine riding horse once she's fully trained." Some fool tried to break her with force before Mr. Carpenter bought her. She was terrified of people when she came here. Took months just to get her to let me touch her without flinching. Helena heard the parallel he wasn't quite stating, the understanding in his voice. "But she trusts you now." "She's learning too." Nathan stroked the mare's neck and the horse leaned into his touch. Trust like that, trust that's been broken before, it takes time, but it's stronger once it's rebuilt, deeper, more valuable because it's been earned instead of given freely. They stood in the sunshine watching the horses, and Helena felt her heart opening despite her best efforts to keep it closed. The summer deepened, bringing long days and warm nights. Nathan taught Helena to ride properly, not side saddle as propriety demanded, but astride like a rancher, practical and free. They rode out into the mountains on Sunday afternoons, always with Margaret or another chaperone at first, maintaining Helena's reputation. Nathan showed her hidden valleys thick with wildflowers, clear streams where trout jumped, vistas that stretched for miles across forested slopes and distant peaks. He taught her to read the land, to notice the small signs that spoke of weather changing or animals passing. He shared his dream with her in greater detail, painting pictures with his words of the ranch he wanted to build, the life he hoped to create. "A place where horses are treated right," he said one afternoon as they sat beside a creek, sharing bread and cheese Margaret had packed. "Where they're valued for more than just what work they can do. Where they're bred carefully, trained patiently, given respect." "It's a beautiful dream," Helena said softly. "Do you think you'll achieve it?" "I will." His confidence was matter-of-fact rather than arrogant. "I've been saving for years, learning everything I can. Another year or two and I'll have enough to buy land, start small. It won't be much at first, but it'll be mine, built on principles I believe in." Helena heard what he wasn't saying, the implied invitation in his words. He was painting a future and offering her a place in it, but indirectly, without pressure. Letting her see the possibility without demanding she commit to it. "Tell me about the horses you'd breed," she said. And the way his face lit up made her chest ache with something that might have been happiness. July brought a celebration to Granite, an Independence Day festival with races and competitions and dancing. Margaret insisted Helena attend, lending her a dress that had belonged to Margaret's daughter, long since married and moved to California. It was simple but pretty, pale blue cotton that made Helena's eyes look more gray than hazel. Nathan appeared at the boarding house in actual town clothes rather than work attire, his hair neatly trimmed, his jaw cleanly shaved. He offered Helena his arm with a nervous formality that charmed her despite herself. "You look beautiful," he said, and there was nothing practiced or smooth about the compliment. He sounded almost surprised, as if her beauty had caught him off guard. The festival was loud and chaotic and wonderful. Helena watched the horse races, cheering without self-consciousness as Nathan competed in the riding events. He won 2 out of 3, his skill unmistakable, and his smile when he caught her eye was bright with uncomplicated joy. They ate roasted corn and pie, watched children play games, applauded the amateur theatrics. As evening fell and the musicians tuned their instruments for dancing, Nathan turned to Helena with a question in his eyes. "Would you dance with me?" Helena's first instinct was refusal. Dancing meant being held, being close, surrendering control. But she looked at Nathan's face, at the hope and patience there, and found herself nodding. He led her onto the packed earth that served as a dance floor, where other couples were already moving to a lively reel. Nathan's hand was warm around hers, his other hand settling at her waist with a lightness that allowed her to pull away at any moment. He held her like something precious but not fragile, valuable but not breakable. They moved through the dance, and Helena felt something shift inside her. This was what she'd thought she'd lost forever. The simple pleasure of being held by someone who cared, the joy of moving together, the connection of 2 people learning each other's rhythms. When the lively music gave way to something slower, Nathan looked at her questioningly. "Another," Helena stepped closer instead of answering, letting him draw her into the slower dance. Other couples pressed close, but Nathan maintained a respectful distance, though his eyes on her face were warm enough to make her blood heat. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For being patient. For not pushing. For showing up every day and proving you're exactly who you say you are." Nathan's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Thank you for giving me the chance. I know it hasn't been easy." They danced in silence for a moment, surrounded by music and laughter and the soft summer night. Then Helena, surprising herself with her own courage, spoke the truth that had been growing in her heart for weeks. "I think I'm starting to trust you." The look on Nathan's face was worth every moment of fear, every risk she'd taken. He looked at her like she'd given him something infinitely precious, which perhaps she had. "I won't betray that trust," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I swear to you, Helena, I will spend every day proving I'm worthy of it." That night, when Nathan walked her back to the boarding house, he stopped at the door and looked at her with a question in his eyes. Helena, feeling brave and terrified and more alive than she'd felt in years, nodded slightly. Nathan leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind to pull away. When his lips brushed hers, feather light and sweet, Helena felt tears spring to her eyes. This was nothing like the demanding, possessive kisses she'd endured before. This was a question and a promise, tender and respectful and full of restrained longing. He pulled back before she was ready for him to, studying her face carefully. "All right," Helena nodded, not trusting her voice. Nathan smiled, squeezed her hand gently, and said goodnight. Inside, Margaret was waiting in the parlor, pretending to read. She looked up as Helena entered, and whatever she saw in her niece's face made her smile. "Good evening." "Yes," Helena said softly. "A very good evening." August came with heat and afternoon thunderstorms that made the mountains look like something from a painting. Helena's life had settled into a pattern that felt dangerously like happiness. She worked alongside Margaret, managed the boarding house accounts with the skills she'd honed in Cheyenne, tended the garden that had become a source of pride and peace. And every day, Nathan was there. Not hovering, not demanding, just present, building their foundation one interaction at a time. They talked about everything and nothing. He learned about her childhood in Iowa, about her father's death, and her mother's determination to give her a better life. She learned about his years being raised by his grandfather, about the old man's wisdom and kindness and his death that had left Nathan alone in the world. "Is that why you're so patient?" Helena asked one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Because your grandfather taught you to be, partly," Nathan admitted. "He used to say that forcing anything, whether it's a horse or a crop or a person, never works out well in the end. That the best things in life grow slowly in their own time. You can nurture them, encourage them, but you can't rush them without doing damage." He sounds like a wise man. He was. Nathan's voice carried grief and fondness in equal measure. "I wish you could have met him. He would have liked you." "What makes you think so?" "Because you're genuine. You don't pretend to be something you're not. My grandfather valued that above almost anything else." Helena thought about the masks she'd worn in Cheyenne, the versions of herself she'd created to survive Thomas's betrayal, Jack's theft, Daniel's violence. "I'm not sure I've been genuine in a long time. I'm not sure I remember how." Nathan reached over and took her hand, the gesture now familiar enough not to startle her. "You've been genuine with me. Maybe that's a start." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the sky deepen to purple and the first stars emerge. Helena felt something she'd thought lost forever: contentment. The bone-deep knowledge that in this moment, in this place, With this person, she was safe. But safety had been an illusion before, and part of Helena still waited for the other shoe to drop, for Nathan's patience to reveal itself as another kind of trap. The test came in mid-August, on a Wednesday afternoon when Helena was alone at the boarding house. Margaret had gone to visit a sick friend, the boarders were at work, and Helena was in the kitchen preparing vegetables for supper when someone knocked at the back door. She opened it to find a stranger, a man in his 30s with cold eyes and a cruel mouth. Something about him made her skin crawl, made her hand move instinctively toward her pocket and the derringer she still carried. "Help you?" she asked, not opening the door fully. "Looking for a friend of mine," the man said, his eyes moving over her in a way that made her want to slam the door. Daniel Foster, heard he might have passed through this area some months back. Helena's blood turned to ice. "Daniel. This man was looking for Daniel. Don't know anyone by that name," she managed, proud that her voice stayed steady. "No." The man's smile was unpleasant. "That's funny, because I heard Daniel was tracking a woman who shot him, a woman who stole from him and ran off. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Helena's hand closed around the derringer in her pocket. "I think you should leave. I think you should invite me in so we can have a proper conversation." The man took a step forward, and Helena pulled the derringer free, pointing it steadily at his chest. "I think you should leave. Now. Or I'll shoot you and claim self-defense, and every person in this town will believe me over a stranger." For a long moment they stared at each other, Helena's heart pounding but her hand steady. Then the man laughed, though there was no humor in it. "Daniel said you were a fighter." Guess he wasn't lying. He backed away from the door, hands raised in mock surrender. "I'll be seeing you around, Miss Ramsey. You can't hide forever." He left, and Helena slammed the door, shooting the bolt with shaking hands. She stood in the kitchen trying to breathe, trying to think through the panic flooding her system. Daniel had sent someone after her. He hadn't let it go, hadn't forgotten. He was still hunting her. She was still standing there, clutching the derringer when Nathan came through the front door. He'd come by to help with some repairs, his arms full of tools, his greeting dying on his lips when he saw her face. "Helena." "What happened?" she told him, words tumbling over each other, watching his expression grow darker with every sentence. When she finished, he set down his tools with careful deliberation and turned to her. "This Daniel, he's one of the men who hurt you." It wasn't a question, but Helena nodded anyway. "I shot him. In Cheyenne back in April. He was beating me and I fought back and I shot him. I don't know if he died or not. I ran before I could find out, but apparently he survived and he sent someone to find me. Tell me everything." Nathan's voice was calm, but Helena could see the controlled fury in his eyes. "I need to know what we're dealing with." And so, for the first time, Helena told someone the full truth. She told him about Thomas and Jack, setting the pattern of betrayal that had made her vulnerable to Daniel. She told him about Daniel's courtship, how he'd seemed kind at first, then gradually isolated her from work and friends. How the first time he hit her, he'd apologized with tears in his eyes and promised it would never happen again. How it happened again, and again, and again. She told him about the stolen savings, the bruises hidden under long sleeves, the fear that had become her constant companion. She told him about the night she'd finally fought back. Daniel's hands around her throat, her desperate grab for the derringer she'd bought in secret, the deafening crack of the gunshot and Daniel stumbling backward, blood spreading across his shirt. "I didn't stay to see if he was alive," she finished, her voice barely a whisper. "I just ran. Took what little I had and ran. I thought I was safe here. I thought he'd never find me." Nathan had listened without interruption, his face growing more severe with every revelation. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, visibly working to control his anger. "You did the right thing," he said finally. "Running, I mean, and shooting him. You defended yourself. Nobody would blame you for that. He might." Helena gestured toward the door. "That man, whoever he is. He won't touch you." Nathan's voice carried absolute conviction. "I won't let anyone hurt you ever again. I promise you that." Helena felt something inside her break, some last wall crumbling. "Don't make promises you can't keep. Don't be like the others who swore they'd protect me and then became the thing I needed protection from." Nathan crossed to her in 2 strides, stopping just within arm's reach, his eyes fierce and pleading. "I am not them. I will never be them. And I'm not promising to protect you because I think you're weak or because I want to control you. I'm promising because I love you, and I cannot stand the thought of you being hurt." The words hung in the air between them, stark and undeniable. "You love me," Helena repeated, testing the words. "I love you," Nathan confirmed. "I've loved you for weeks, maybe from the moment I first saw you on those stairs, looking like you'd fight the whole world if it came at you. I love your strength and your intelligence and your kindness despite everything you've endured. I love the way you tend that garden like it's something precious, the way you laugh at my bad jokes when you think I'm not looking, the way you're learning to trust again even though it terrifies you." Tears were streaming down Helena's face now, and she didn't try to stop them. "I'm so scared. I'm scared of loving you and being wrong again. I'm scared of Daniel finding me. I'm scared of losing this, whatever this is between us." "Then be scared," Nathan said gently. "But don't let that fear stop you from living. Don't let Daniel or Thomas or Jack, don't let any of them steal your future the way they tried to steal your past. You survived them. You're stronger than you know, and you don't have to face any of it alone anymore. I'm here and I'm not going anywhere." Helena stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and let Nathan pull her into his arms. She pressed her face against his chest and cried, releasing years of pain and fear and anger. He held her steady, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring soft reassurances. When the storm of emotion finally passed, Helena pulled back enough to look up at him. "I think I love you too," she whispered. "I'm terrified to say it, terrified to feel it, but I think I do." Nathan's smile was radiant. He cupped her face gently in his hands and kissed her, deeper than that first night but still achingly tender. Helena kissed him back, letting herself feel it, letting herself hope. When they finally broke apart, Nathan's expression turned serious. "We need to deal with this threat. I'm going to talk to Sheriff Morrison, let him know what happened. And I'm not leaving you alone until we know you're safe." True to his word, Nathan moved into the boarding house that night, taking a different room but remaining close. He spoke with Sheriff Morrison, a gruff but fair man who took the threat seriously and promised to keep an eye out for Daniel's associate. Word spread through Granite's small community, and Helena found herself surrounded by unexpected support. Mr. Carpenter offered the resources of his ranch if needed. Other townspeople made it clear that strangers asking questions about Helena would be met with silence and suspicion. Even the miners, rough men who normally kept to themselves, let it be known that they protected their own, and Helena was one of them now. The man who'd come looking for her left town 3 days later, escorted to the stagecoach by Sheriff Morrison, and strongly encouraged not to return. Whether he reported back to Daniel, whether Daniel would try again, nobody knew. But Helena felt safe in a way she hadn't since before Thomas's betrayal, protected not by one man's promises but by an entire community's solidarity. September brought cooler weather and changing leaves, the aspens turning gold against the dark green pines. Nathan took Helena riding up into the high country, Just the two of them now that their relationship was acknowledged and accepted. They rode to a beautiful valley he'd found years ago, a meadow surrounded by peaks, with a creek running through it and trees providing shade. "This is it," Nathan said as they stood looking out over the land. "This is where I want to build my ranch. I've been saving for years, and I finally have enough to make an offer. The land belongs to a mining company that hasn't done anything with it. Mr. Carpenter helped me negotiate. If all goes well, it'll be mine by next month." Helena looked at the valley, seeing not just its present beauty but its potential. She could picture buildings, corrals, horses grazing in the meadow, a home, a life. "It's perfect," she said softly. Nathan turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "I want you there with me. I want us to build this together, create something beautiful. I want to marry you, Helena, if you'll have me. I know it's fast. I know you're still healing, and I'll wait as long as you need. But I want you to know my intentions. I want forever with you." Helena looked at this man who'd proven himself day after day, who'd seen her at her worst and loved her anyway, who'd promised to spend forever proving he was different and had already made good on that promise. She thought about the future she'd given up hoping for, the happiness she'd thought lost. "Yes," she said, the word emerging strong and clear, no hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." Nathan's shout of joy startled the horses and sent birds exploding from the trees. He swept Helena up and spun her around, both of them laughing, and when he set her down, he kissed her with all the restrained longing of the past months finally released. They were married in October, in the small church in Granite, with Margaret beaming through happy tears and what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Helena wore a dress of ivory silk that Margaret had saved from her own wedding, altered to fit. Nathan wore a new suit that he was clearly uncomfortable in, though he looked handsome enough to make Helena's heart skip. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, their vows traditional but weighted with personal meaning. When Nathan promised to love and cherish her, Helena saw the truth of it in his eyes. When she promised to trust and honor him, she meant it with every fiber of her being. Mr. Carpenter had given them a week away from ranch duties as a wedding gift, and Nathan took Helena to his valley, to a small cabin he'd been secretly building for months. It was rough and unfinished but weathertight, with a good fireplace and windows that looked out over the meadow. "I wanted us to have a place of our own," he said as he carried her over the threshold, another tradition that made her laugh. "Even if it's not much yet." "It's perfect," Helena said and meant it. They spent that week alone in the valley, learning each other in new ways, building the intimate trust that would sustain their marriage. Nathan was as patient and gentle with Helena in their marriage bed as he'd been in everything else, attuned to her needs, careful with her lingering fears from Daniel's violence. Helena discovered that love could be tender as well as passionate, that sharing her body could be a joy rather than a duty or a weapon. She learned Nathan's scars too, the small marks of a life lived working with animals and the land, the larger wound on his shoulder from a horse accident years before. They mapped each other's bodies and hearts, building intimacy brick by careful brick. On their last night in the cabin, lying tangled together under quilts as the fire burned low, Nathan spoke quietly into the darkness. "Are you happy?" Helena considered the question seriously, taking stock of herself. She thought about the woman who'd arrived in Granite 6 months ago, broken and terrified and convinced she'd never trust again. She thought about the long journey from that pain to this moment. "Yes," she said finally, "I'm happy, more than I ever thought I could be again." She felt Nathan's smile against her hair. "Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." They returned to Granite, and moved into a small house near the boarding house while they worked on making the cabin livable year-round. Nathan continued working for the Carpenter Ranch while beginning to build his own herd, starting with 3 mares and a good stallion. Helena helped Margaret at the boarding house and kept their books, her skill with numbers proving invaluable as Nathan's business took shape. The winter was hard, with heavy snows that isolated the valley for weeks at a time. But Helena had never been happier. She and Nathan worked side by side, building their life together, their trust deepening with every shared task and overcome challenge. In February, Helena realized she was pregnant. The knowledge filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She remembered Daniel's violence, the fear of bringing a child into that nightmare. But Nathan's reaction, his pure unrestrained delight, his immediate tenderness and care soothed those fears. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We're going to have a baby." He was impossibly gentle with her throughout the pregnancy, treating her like she might break, until Helena finally told him firmly that she was pregnant, not dying, and still perfectly capable of doing her work. "I know," Nathan said, looking sheepish. "I just want to take care of you." "You do," Helena assured him. "Every day. But taking care of me doesn't mean wrapping me in cotton. It means trusting me to know my own limits." It was another lesson in their ongoing education in loving each other well, in being partners rather than protector and protected. Nathan adjusted, found a balance between care and trust, and Helena loved him more for his willingness to listen and change. Their son was born in late October, a year and a week after their wedding, as the aspens turned gold again and the first snow dusted the mountain peaks. The birth was hard but healthy, attended by the local midwife with Margaret and Nathan present. When the baby finally emerged, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Nathan had tears streaming down his face. "A son," he whispered, cradling the tiny body with hands that were absurdly large by comparison. "Helena, we have a son." They named him Samuel James Cross, Samuel for the young miner Nathan had helped that first week, James for Helena's father. Little Samuel had Nathan's dark hair and Helena's gray eyes, and from the first moment she held him, Helena felt a fierce protective love she'd never imagined possible. The years unfolded in a pattern of work and growth and deepening love. Nathan's ranch prospered, his reputation for breeding and training quality horses spreading throughout Montana territory. Helena managed their finances and helped with the horses, discovering her own talent for working with the animals. They had 2 more children, a daughter they named Margaret Rose when Helena was 26, and another son, Daniel Thomas, when she was 28. The names were deliberate, reclaiming painful associations and transforming them into something beautiful. "Are you sure?" Nathan had asked when Helena suggested the name Daniel. "After everything, I'm sure," Helena said firmly. "That man doesn't get to own that name forever. Our son will make it mean something good." Little Daniel was, ironically, the sweetest-tempered of their children, quick to laugh and generous with affection. Watching him grow, Helena felt the last of her old wounds healing, the past losing its power to hurt her. Samuel grew into a serious boy who loved the horses as much as his father did. Margaret was wild and fearless, racing her brothers on horseback and climbing trees that made Helena's heart jump into her throat. Daniel was the peacemaker, the one who soothed fights and found compromises. Helena watched them with a gratitude that never faded, marveling that this was her life now. That she could wake up beside a man who loved her faithfully, who'd never raised a hand to her in anger, who kept his promises. That she could hear her children's laughter and feel safe and content and blessed. The ranch grew year by year. The original cabin expanded into a proper house with room for their growing family. They built barns and corrals, developed water sources, fenced pastures. Nathan's reputation brought buyers from across the territory, and sometimes from as far away as California and Colorado. Margaret the Elder remained a constant presence in their lives, dividing her time between the boarding house and the ranch, beloved by her grandnieces and grandnephews. She lived to see Samuel start taking over some of the horse training at 15, to see young Margaret win her first riding competition at 12, to see Daniel charm everyone he met with his sunny nature. She died peacefully in her sleep when Helena was 31, and they buried her in the church cemetery in Granite with half the town in attendance. Helena grieved for the aunt who'd given her refuge when she'd had nowhere else to go, who'd believed in her capacity to heal and love again. "She gave me everything," Helena said to Nathan as they stood by the grave after everyone else had left. "She gave me a place to start over, a chance to find you. I'll miss her every day." "She knew you loved her," Nathan said, his arm around Helena's waist. "And she died knowing you were happy and safe. That's not a small thing." Through all the years, Helena never forgot where she'd come from. She never forgot the woman who'd arrived in Granite broken and terrified. When she encountered other women in similar situations, those fleeing violence or betrayal, she helped them quietly, offering work or shelter or just a sympathetic ear. She and Nathan became known for their kindness, for taking in strays both animal and human. More than one desperate soul found refuge at the Cross Ranch, found employment and safety and a chance to heal. Helena understood that kind of desperation from the inside, and she never turned anyone away who genuinely needed help. The years brought challenges as well as joys. There were harsh winters and dry summers, horses that took ill, financial struggles during economic downturns. There were childhood injuries that scared Helena badly, and the normal trials of raising strong-willed children. But through it all, Helena and Nathan's foundation held strong. They'd built their marriage on truth and patience, on proven trust rather than easy promises. That foundation sustained them through everything life brought. They fought sometimes, as any married couple does, but they fought fair, with respect and honesty. Nathan never used his size or strength to intimidate, never raised his voice in anger. Helena never used her past wounds as weapons, never assumed the worst of him. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Nathan took Helena back to the valley where he'd proposed, where they'd spent their first week as a married couple. The cabin was gone now, replaced by the larger house, but the valley remained as beautiful as ever. 20 years, Nathan said as they stood looking out over the meadow where horses grazed peacefully. "Sometimes it feels like forever, sometimes like no time at all." "Are you sorry?" Helena asked, teasing. "That you promised forever to a woman who was too scared to trust you?" Nathan pulled her close, his arms secure around her waist, and looked down at her with the same honest love she'd seen on their wedding day. "Not for a single second. You were worth every moment of patience, every day of proving myself. You still are." Helena stood on her toes to kiss him, still feeling that flutter in her chest that his touch had always inspired. "I love you. Thank you for keeping your promise." "What promise?" "To spend forever proving you're different. You've proven it every day for 20 years, and I believe you now." "I trust you completely." Nathan's smile was bright enough to rival the sun. "Good, because I'm not planning to stop. Forever's a long time, and I intend to spend every day of it making sure you know you're loved." They stayed in the valley until sunset, watching their horses and talking about their children, about the future. Samuel was 20 now, increasingly taking over the ranch operations. Margaret at 17 was already an accomplished rider, winning competitions and considering training professionally. Daniel at 15 showed promise at the business side, his head for numbers matching his mother's. You think they understand how lucky they are? Helena wondered. To grow up safe and loved, not knowing what it's like to be afraid in their own home. I think they know we love them, Nathan said. And maybe that's enough. Maybe they don't need to understand the darkness to appreciate the light. Helena thought about this, about the life they'd built from the ashes of her old pain. I used to think my past had ruined me, that I'd never be whole enough to be happy again. And now I think maybe it was all necessary. Not that I deserved what happened, but that I needed to walk through that fire to find my way here, to you, to this life. She gestured at the valley, the ranch, everything they'd created together. I wouldn't trade this for anything, not even to undo the pain that came before it. Nathan was quiet for a moment, then spoke with the thoughtfulness that had always been characteristic of him. I think maybe you're giving pain too much credit. You would have been extraordinary no matter what path brought you to me. Your strength, your kindness, your intelligence, those things aren't products of suffering. They're just you, who you've always been. It was exactly the right thing to say, and Helena felt tears prick her eyes. After 20 years, Nathan still had the power to move her with his understanding, his ability to see straight to the heart of things. They rode home as the stars emerged, the horses knowing the way without guidance. The house glowed with lamplight, their children visible through the windows as they moved about their evening routines. It looked like a painting, Helena thought, like something from a fairy tale rather than real life. But it was real. She'd lived every day of it, watched it build moment by moment, brick by brick. She'd loved and been loved, trusted and been proven trustworthy. She'd created this life not despite her past, but through it, letting her scars make her stronger rather than letting them break her. The years continued to pass, bringing all the changes that time inevitably brings. Samuel married at 23, a kind woman from a neighboring ranch, and they built a house on cross land, continuing to work with the horses. Margaret did become a professional rider and trainer, making a name for herself throughout Montana and beyond. Daniel went to college in Helena, studying business, and returned to manage the growing financial side of the ranch operation. Helena and Nathan became grandparents, first to Samuel's twin boys, then to Margaret's daughter, and eventually to a whole gaggle of grandchildren who filled the ranch with noise and joy. They slowed down as age crept up on them, delegating more to their children, but they never fully retired. Nathan still worked with the horses every day, moving slower now but with the same patience and skill. Helena still managed the books, her mind as sharp as ever even as her hair turned gray. They still rode out to their valley when weather permitted, still sat on the porch in the evenings watching the sunset, still reached for each other in the night. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a huge celebration. Friends and family came from across Montana, filling the ranch with laughter and stories. Helena looked around at the gathering, at the life that had grown from that first tentative trust she'd placed in Nathan, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. 40 years, she said to Nathan as they danced slowly to music provided by Samuel's eldest boy on fiddle. Forever's turning out to be pretty wonderful. Nathan, his hair now silver but his eyes still bright, smiled down at her. It's not over yet. I've got plenty more years of proving myself planned. You don't need to prove anything anymore. I believed you decades ago. Maybe, Nathan conceded, but I like proving it anyway. Keeps me on my toes. They danced until Helena's feet ached, then sat on the porch and watched their family celebrate. 3 generations brought together by the love Helena had been so afraid to trust all those years ago. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the mountains standing eternal against the horizon. Somewhere in those mountains was the valley where Nathan had first declared his love, where they'd begun their life together. Somewhere in those mountains was every moment of patience and trust and proven promises that had built the foundation for all of this. Helena leaned against Nathan's shoulder, his arm secure around her waist, and closed her eyes with a contentment so deep it felt like grace. She'd been hurt, badly and repeatedly, by men who'd used her trust against her. She'd been so broken that she'd thought herself beyond repair. But Nathan Cross had seen through all that damage to the person beneath. He'd promised to spend forever proving he was different, and he'd kept that promise every single day for 40 years. He'd proven it in patience and consistency, in respect and honesty, in love demonstrated through actions rather than empty words. And Helena had taken the terrifying leap of trusting again. She'd risked her wounded heart one more time, despite every lesson that had taught her not to. She'd let Nathan close, let him prove himself, let herself believe in the possibility of something better. That risk had given her everything. A love that had only deepened with time. A family that filled her days with joy. A life so full of happiness that sometimes she had to stop and remind herself it was real, that she deserved it, that she'd earned it through her courage in choosing to hope again. The party continued into the evening, firelight replacing sunset as night fell. Children chased each other through the gathering while adults told stories and shared memories. Someone started singing, and other voices joined in, creating a harmony that rose into the Montana night. Helena listened with her eyes closed, Nathan's heartbeat steady beneath her ear, and thought about the woman she'd been when she'd arrived in Granite all those years ago. She wished she could go back and tell that frightened, broken woman that everything would be all right. That the pain wouldn't last forever. That she'd find someone who really was different, who really would spend forever proving it, but maybe that woman wouldn't have believed it. Maybe she'd needed to live through every day, to accumulate those small proofs piece by piece, until trust became inevitable rather than impossible. Maybe there were no shortcuts through healing, only the patient work of allowing it to happen. "Thank you," Helena said softly, knowing Nathan would hear her despite the noise of the celebration around them. "For what? For being different, for proving it every day, for giving me this." She gestured at the gathering, at their children and grandchildren, at the ranch they'd built together. "For giving me forever." Nathan's arm tightened around her, and when he spoke, his voice carried all the love and conviction it had held 40 years ago when he'd first made his promise. "Forever's not something you give. It's something we build together, day by day, choice by choice. And every day for the rest of my life, I'll keep choosing you. Keep choosing this. Keep proving that love doesn't have to hurt, that trust can be honored, that promises can be kept." Helena tilted her face up to kiss him, and even after 40 years the touch of his lips still felt like coming home. Around them, their family celebrated, their legacy of love made manifest in the people they'd raised and the life they'd created. The stars emerged overhead, brilliant in the clear mountain air, the same stars that had witnessed their courtship and marriage and all the years between. Helena looked up at them and felt the profound rightness of this moment, of this life, of the choice she'd made so long ago to risk her heart one final time. She'd said she'd been hurt too many times. Nathan had whispered that he'd spend forever proving he was different, and he had. Every single day, through all the joys and sorrows, through the mundane and the extraordinary, through raising children and building a business and growing old together, Nathan had proven himself different. Not perfect, because perfection wasn't human, but faithful and honest and true. He'd proven that love could be safe without being boring, passionate without being possessive, strong without being violent. He'd proven that promises could be kept, that trust could be rewarded, that forever was more than just a pretty word. And Helena had proven something too. She'd proven that broken things could heal, that wounded hearts could love again. That courage wasn't the absence of fear but the decision to move forward despite it. She'd proven that she was stronger than her past, that she deserved happiness, that she could build something beautiful from the ruins of what had been destroyed. Together, they'd proven that love, real love, patient love, committed love, was worth every risk and every moment of fear. That it could weather any storm, overcome any obstacle, endure any trial. As the celebration continued into the night, as their family laughed and sang and danced under the Montana stars, Helena held Nathan's hand and felt the profound peace of a story well told, a life well lived, a promise faithfully kept. Forever had turned out to be everything she'd feared it couldn't be. Real, enduring, and more beautiful than anything she'd dared to dream during those dark days in Cheyenne, when she thought her capacity for trust had been broken beyond repair. Nathan had been right. He was different. And he'd spent not just forever proving it, but every precious day of the 40 years they'd shared, building a love story that would be told and retold by their descendants for generations to come. As the night deepened and the party began to wind down, Nathan and Helena remained on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the chill, watching their family slowly disperse to various houses and rooms across the ranch. Their children came to say goodnight, kissing them both, making jokes about the old folks needing their rest. Old folks, Nathan grumbled good-naturedly after the last one had left. I'll show them old folks. Helena laughed, the sound as warm and genuine as it had been in their youth. Let them think we're doddering. It means they'll take care of us when we actually need it. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes after decades of shared life, when words become optional because understanding runs deeper than language. The ranch settled into nighttime quiet, horses nickering softly in the barns, the creek providing gentle background music. You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't come to Granite? Nathan asked eventually. If you'd gone somewhere else, made different choices. Helena considered this seriously. Sometimes, but I don't think I'd have survived anywhere else. Margaret gave me exactly what I needed, a safe place to heal and someone who believed I could. And then you showed up and gave me a reason to want to heal, not just survive. I almost didn't come back to Granite that summer, Nathan admitted. Had an offer for steady work in Wyoming, better pay. I turned it down because I liked staying at Margaret's, like the town, like the area. If I'd taken that job, we'd never have met. The thought was sobering, how close they'd come to missing each other entirely, how different both their lives would have been. Helena took his hand, lacing their fingers together. But you didn't take it. You came back, and I was there. And somehow, despite everything working against us, despite all my fear and damage, we found each other. Best decision I ever made, Nathan said simply. Coming back to Granite that summer. Everything good in my life came from that choice. They eventually made their way inside, the house quiet now with most guests departed or settled into various rooms. In their own bedroom, the same room they'd shared for 40 years, they prepared for bed with the ease of long practice. Helena caught sight of herself in the mirror and paused, studying her reflection. 63 years old, her face lined with age, her hair completely gray, her body bearing the marks of time and childbearing. She looked nothing like the young woman who'd arrived in Granite all those years ago, terrified and broken. But her eyes, she realized, looked different. They held peace now, and joy, and the kind of confidence that comes from being truly loved. The haunted look was gone, replaced by the accumulated happiness of decades well lived. Nathan came up behind her, his own reflection showing the passage of time. Silver hair, deeper lines, the slight stoop that came from years of physical labor. But his eyes still held the same honest warmth they'd had at 28, the same steady love. "Still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen," he said, and after 40 years, Helena knew he meant it. "You need your eyes checked, old man." "My eyes work just fine. I see what's important." "I see you." They climbed into bed, Nathan's arm automatically going around Helena, her head finding its familiar place on his shoulder. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and coming snow. Inside, they were warm and safe and together. "Nathan," Helena said into the darkness. I'm glad I was brave enough to try. Glad I didn't let fear win. Glad I gave you the chance to prove yourself." She felt him smile against her hair. "Me too. Best thing you ever did was take that chance on a cowboy who was willing to wait forever." "You didn't have to wait forever. Just long enough." "Same thing," Nathan murmured, already drifting toward sleep. "When you love someone, every moment of waiting is worth it." Helena closed her eyes, listening to Nathan's breathing even out, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her. She thought about forever, about how it wasn't a destination but a journey, not a promise made once but renewed every day through choices and actions. She thought about the young woman in Cheyenne, who'd believed she'd been hurt too many times to ever trust again, who'd thought her capacity for love had been permanently destroyed. She wished she could tell that woman not to give up, that healing was possible, that love could be different. But maybe that woman had found her way here precisely because she'd been brave enough to hope when hope seemed impossible, to trust when trust felt like suicide, to risk her heart one more time despite every reason not to. Maybe the story wasn't about Nathan proving he was different, though he certainly had. Maybe it was equally about Helena proving to herself that she was strong enough to try again, courageous enough to believe in possibilities her past suggested couldn't exist. Maybe it was about both of them choosing each other, day after day, building something beautiful from damaged materials, creating a love story that honored both the pain that had come before and the joy they'd built together. As sleep claimed her, Helena's last conscious thought was one of gratitude so profound it felt like prayer. Gratitude for second chances and patient love, for a cowboy who'd kept his promises and an aunt who'd offered sanctuary, for the courage to try again and the wisdom to recognize something real when it finally appeared. She'd been hurt too many times, had arrived in Granite convinced her story was over, that the best she could hope for was survival rather than happiness. But Nathan Cross had whispered that he'd spend forever proving he was different. And he had proven it, day by day, year by year, decade by decade, until forever stopped being a terrifying unknown and became instead the most beautiful reality Helena had ever known. In the morning, they woke to fresh snow covering the ranch, transforming it into something magical. Their grandchildren, staying over after the party, exploded into the yard with shouts of delight, throwing snowballs and building forts. Samuel and Margaret helped their father with the morning chores while Daniel made breakfast for the crowd. Helena stood at the window watching it all, this life that had seemed impossible when she'd first arrived in Granite. Nathan came to stand beside her, sliding his arm around her waist in the gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Good morning," he said, kissing her temple. "Good morning. Look at them all. Can you believe this is our life? That we built all this?" "Every day I can't quite believe my luck," Nathan admitted. "That you said yes. That you trusted me. That I get to wake up beside you every morning. 40 years and you're still romantic. 40 years, and you're still worth being romantic about." They stood together watching their family, their legacy, their forever made manifest in children and grandchildren, and a ranch built on principles of patience and respect. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the valley in white, and Helena thought about cycles and seasons, about endings and beginnings. Her story had started in pain and fear, in Cheyenne with a gun in her hand and blood on the floor. It had continued in Granite, in a boarding house owned by a woman who'd given her refuge, where she'd met a cowboy willing to wait as long as it took. And now, 40 years later, surrounded by love and family and the peace she'd thought forever lost, Helena understood that her story wasn't about the pain that had come before or even about Nathan's patience afterward. It was about choice, about choosing to try again when trying seemed impossible, about choosing to believe in possibilities that seemed too good to be true, about choosing love every day, through good times and hard times, until that choice became as natural and necessary as breathing. She'd said she'd been hurt too many times. Nathan had whispered that he'd spend forever proving he was different, but the real miracle wasn't his proof or his patience. It was her courage in accepting it, in opening her wounded heart one more time, in daring to believe that this time, finally, love could be what it was supposed to be, safe and honest and true. And it had been. For 40 years and counting, through all the moments that made up forever, their love had been exactly what it was supposed to be. Outside, their grandchildren played in the snow, their laughter ringing clear in the mountain air. Inside, Helena and Nathan held each other and watched, two people who'd found each other against all odds and built something that would outlast them both. Forever wasn't a promise or a destination. It was this moment and all the moments before it and all the moments still to come. It was choosing each other when choosing was hard and celebrating together when joy came easy. It was patience and trust and love demonstrated through actions rather than words. It was a cowboy who'd kept his promise and a woman who'd been brave enough to let him. It was 40 years of proving that love, real love, was worth every risk, every moment of fear, every leap of faith it took to try again. It was everything Helena had thought she'd lost, everything she'd found in Granite, everything she and Nathan had built together in the valley that had become home. It was, simply and profoundly, forever. And it was real.